Hi guys, I'm John Lane Maniago and I will report chapter 1 lesson 4 the self in the Western and Eastern thoughts. I report the abstract of the self in the Western and Eastern thoughts. In Eastern thoughts, people tend to answer affirmatively and think of the self as an entity separate from others. In Eastern philosophy thoughts, the self is often treated as an illusion. Buddhism is another common Eastern religion and philosophy. Buddhism believes in interconnectedness or that everything is connected. The problem of the self currently remains unsolved. In the literature, there are many correlated concepts such as self-consciousness, consciousness self, personal identity, and other Eastern and Western concepts of the self are diametrically opposite. Sigmund Freud, for example, introduced the structural model of the basic apparatus, part of which is the ego, which however does not completely cover the concept of the self. David Hume, from a philosophical perspective, conceived the self as an illusion. Only content of the consciousness are present which are not constant but changeable. For whom the only thing that exists is the truth of the consciousness. George Hegel argued that when the self thinks about itself, it has no includes itself in these thoughts, but this represent as paradox. Immanuel Kant viewed the self as a thing, it thing itself or non-non. Western philosophy univocally argues that the self is an illusory fiction and that it does not exist in a reality. It is evidence that there exists a pluralism which respect to the existence of the self as well as that some Eastern authors have similar views to the Eastern concept of the self. In the current article, the most notable concept of the self in the Eastern and the Western philosophy will be discussed, and conceptual linguistic analysis of the notion of self and its correlated notion will be performed subsequently. It will be shown as a linguistic conclusion influence that search for the material substrate of the self in the field of neuroscience and neuropsychology.
Hi, good day everyone. My name is Mark. I will now discuss about the self in Western and Eastern thoughts. So, Confucianism. It can be seen as code of ethical conduct of how one should properly act according to their relationship with other people. So, it also focuses on having a humanist life. The identity and self-concept of the individual are interwoven with the identity and status of his or her community or culture, sharing it with pride and as well its failures. Next one is Taoism. It is a living in the way of the Tao or the universe. Taoism rejects the hierarchy and the strictness brought by Confucianism and would prepare as a very simple lifestyle, and its teaching thus aim to describe how to attain life. Self is not just an extension of the family or community, it is part of the universe, one of the forms and manifestations. Next one is Buddhism. The self seen as an illusion born out of ignorance of trying to hold and control things. So, human-centered needs. Thus, the self is also the source of all these sufferings. Therefore, our quest to forget about the self, forget the craving of self, break the attachments you have with the world, and renounce the self, which is the cause of all suffering. And doing so, it is called attain the state of nirvana. Okay. So Buddhism, the self for Buddhism with all its connection and selfish ideas. It is not just of the center of the picture but from the whole picture entirely. Confucianism and Taoism. The self or the individual is not focus of the above mentioned Asian or Eastern philosophies or beliefs. Even with extended discussion about how the self should work, Confucianism and Taoism still situate the self within a bigger context. In striving to become a better person, one does not create self above other people or nature, but a self that is beneficial to his community as well as in order and harmony with everything else. So the Western thoughts or perspective, it does not discount the role of environment and society in the information of the self, but the focus is always looking forward the self. You compare yourself in order to be better, you create association and bask in the glory of that group for your self-esteem. You put primacy in developing yourself. The Western thought looks at the world in dualities, wherein you are distinct from the other person. The creator is separate from the object he created, in which the self is distinguished and acknowledged. The Western culture is what we call an individualistic culture, since their focus is on the person. By valuing the individual, Westerners may seem to have loose associations or even loyalty to their groups. Competition is the name of the game, and they are more likely straightforward and forceful in their communication as well as decision making. Also, Westerners emphasizes more on the value of equality even if they see that the individual can rise above everything else because everyone is on their own in the competition. One can say that they also promote ideals that create fair competition and protect the individual. Westerners would most likely call their bosses, parents, or the other seniors by their first name. The boss can also be approached head on when conflicts or problems about him rises. So the Eastern thoughts or perspective. The Eastern perspective sees the other person as a part of yourself as well as the things you may create. A drama in which everyone is interconnected with their specific roles. Based on several studies shows that Americans it talk more about their personal attributes when describing themselves. Americans would highlight their personal achievements. Eastern or Oriental person look after the welfare of their groups and values cooperation. They would also be more compromising and they tend to go around the bush in explaining things hoping that the person would feel what they really want to say. That's all. Thank you.